has changed for women as well, but I think what I really want to think about is, I mean, there's depression, there's mental health everywhere on both sides of genders. Why is it that 80% of that, 80% of the suicides then are men? Why is it more with men than women? I mean, those are the things that I want to delve into. They're the things that I want to understand more. Why it's taboo for a man to have depression or anxiety or, you know, any of the broad spectrum of mental health conditions, and why they're then the 80% of the suicides. And as I said at the start, you know, 12 men dying every day by suicide. Why is that figure so high? Why is that happening? Yes, I understand the reasons why men are depressed, but, you know, with every depression, no matter what it is very serious, and whatever makes you depressed is very serious. But why is it then that men are the ones that are mostly ending up being the suicide victims?
Yeah, it's difficult to say. It's an interesting question, and what I can say from me personally being depressed this time last year is that whenever I reached out for help, and whenever I looked for counselling, I was reaching out for help at that time, it took a long time, and even whenever I personally spoke to a counsellor, I had found myself, I was very cut off. Felt very isolated. I wasn't particularly connected to the counsellor. It was difficult for the counsellor to understand why I was depressed, and it was difficult for me to get to the bottom of why I was. So maybe I just had a bad counsellor, but I know that it took a long time to get a counsellor, and I was pretty down at the time. Secondly, I didn't really connect with the counsellor. She was female, and a lot of counsellors are. The counsellor didn't really seem to understand kind of what it was that was getting me down in the first place, and yeah, very often mental health services do take a long time. The nature of male friendships, and also we haven't spoken yet about alpha men and kind of why they are depressed, and I think maybe that's what we're kind of going on to now, is it?
Yeah, I mean, maybe could be. Where I was going to go from there was, do you think that more men feel like their masculinity is not threatened, but is taken away from them by suffering a mental health condition? Do you think maybe men feel afraid to open up because they don't want to seem weak, because they have to be that alpha male, they have to be strong? So if they admit that something's going wrong in their head, then they're weaker. Whereas women are the fairer sex, so they're more likely to open up more. Do you think that could contribute to it?
That's a good question. I think we are kind of moving on to the topic of alpha men now and stuff. I think we've pretty comprehensively covered sort of sensitive men and why they're feeling kind of difficult in our contemporary era. Alpha men is a totally different thing, and obviously there's a lot of spectrum between that. Yes, definitely. Do I think that mental health is as taboo as it was 20 years ago? No. I don't. I think that the taboo around mental health is not as bad as it was 10 years ago, and it's not as bad as it was 20 years ago. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's not there at all. And I think that some men, alpha men, traditional sort of stoic, whatever men maybe do, feel a little bit ashamed to admit it. I personally am not a traditional alpha man. I was more than happy to seek out help and advice whenever things were getting on top of me. Other men may or may not be embarrassed, and that might be a topic of conversation. And why they're embarrassed is, I don't know that they would necessarily tell everybody. They don't, right, sorry, I'm kind of rambling a little. They don't want to weaken themselves in front of the tribe, but they don't have to. That's why they feel embarrassed. They don't want to weaken themselves in front of the tribe, but they don't have to. Nowadays, you can kind of seek out counselling without anybody knowing about it. But the real problem is that they don't seek out counselling at all. So they're embarrassed to themselves that they don't seek out counselling at all, or they don't kind of rectify their behaviours. A lot of these alpha men types have found themselves in bad situations like criminality or like debt or like, and are less likely to seek help if they kind of get into debt, are less likely to seek help if they're depressed out of pride. Mm-hmm. I think is my perspective on that. Yeah. And that isn't necessarily healthy. I don't think that alpha men need to weaken themselves in front of the tribe by telling anybody about their problems if that's not what they're comfortable with. But they do need to admit it to themselves that they are in whatever difficulty they're in and take whatever steps they can to get out of that situation. Let's assume that's financial debt. Then going to a financial planner would be sensible. But a lot of alpha men are too prideful to admit that they're in financial debt, so they don't seek out help. Sometimes that help can take a long time to arrive. Sometimes it's a case that they're just in a bad place mentally and they're not. It takes an amount of humility to admit that you're kind of in a bad place mentally. As somebody who has had experience with depression feels very real at the time. And whenever you're ruminating and you're beating yourself up and you believe that you're the worst person in the world, etc., that feels like a real reality, and it's hard to kind of say to yourself, this is depression. That's a hard, it's like admitting that you're an alcoholic, essentially, because it doesn't feel like depression, it just feels like you're, a dick. Basically, it feels like you're a terrible person, and that all you can do is think about how much of a terrible person you are, and all the terrible things that have happened to you, and that feels real. So it takes an amount of humility to say, this is depression and I need help. So you don't need to say that to anyone else if you are an alpha man. All you need to do is to seek out help in privacy, and, what do you call it? A word defeat depression is confidential, but it is only as good as it is. If you can admit it to yourself and seek out help from any number of confidential services, then that is where alpha men are falling down.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with a lot of what you're saying there. And I do think there's still that whole, and even for women as well, there's that whole, buck up, things can't be that bad, or there's worse off people than you, what have you got to be depressed about? And, there's all of those things as well that kind of feed into how people are feeling. And especially for men, you get that whole, wise up, you're fine, chin up, mate, there is still that sort of stigma that comes with it, that we are trying to break through, and so many people are making headway in that. We do have a long way to go with that. I think men's mental health is something that needs a lot more work, and hopefully over these next few years we're going to see more and more of that changing. And I definitely think, being someone from Northern Ireland, I definitely think we need better mental health services. And I actually had planned so much work with Aware NI this year. Unfortunately, that's come to a halt, but one of the things we were discussing was men's mental health. So it's something that I have always been advocating for and trying to push more and more. And I think it's something you could talk to the cows come home on this topic, because again we go back to the whole 80% of suicide is male, so we need to work together, we need to do something to change this. And neither of us have the answers. We probably won't be the ones that have the answers, but if we can do what we can, continue, I mean, each week we always bring up something that helps people. You know, the whole self-improvement thing that you do is fantastic, sharing what you're doing to help you, and even if each video you put out just puts that wee seed into one person's head, you have done something good with your video. You've done something good with your day just by sharing that. And I think if more of us just share part of us, and I don't necessarily mean like us on social media and stuff, just with people around you. I mean, I'll touch on my younger brother he has ADHD and a slight learning disability, and he struggles to keep a job because of his ADHD, which wasn't actually diagnosed until he was practically an adult. So there wasn't a lot of that work that gets done more now with children to help them adapt. Not that I'm saying it's perfect, because there's still a lot of headway to be made there, but he struggles to keep a job and actually hasn't had a job now for quite a while. And he actually, it's made his depression so bad because he feels worthless. He feels like he can't provide for his family. He feels like he's not a man. He feels like that's been stripped away from him because he can't provide for his family. And I think that's something that we need to change, that, you know, all of us are struggling in our own way. It doesn't make you any less of a person. It doesn't make you any less of a man. It doesn't make you any less of a woman to have struggles. You know, it's how you get through that is the most important, and continue to fight it. And I think I would love to see more of that changing, especially as again, from Northern Ireland. I think we definitely need more support here, because as you said, it took ages to get support, and I even see it for teenagers and stuff as well, how long it takes to actually get counsellors to see psychiatrists or any of that. It takes ages. And I know so many people right now, I mean, just to lightly touch on the pandemic before we do finish up, but you know, so many people aren't getting to see their weekly counsellors or those meetings that they go to all the time. So more of those people are suffering, and I have no numbers, I have no knowledge of what the suicide rate has gone up to at the moment, but if I was a gambling person, I would put money on that suicide rate has gone up since all of this has happened around the world, because people aren't able to do the things that they were told to do, to go and see doctors, to go and do this, go and do that. You're not able to do the same things. But I definitely think men need more support.
Yes. It's an interesting point that you mentioned, there's people worse off than you. There is an interesting, whenever you're depressed, you feel a sense of guilt. Almost like you are, you know, you're worthless. You know, you do feel as if you are worthless, and that you asking for a counsellor is you taking a counsellor away from another person who is more deserving of a counsellor. And that is definitely something that I felt whenever I went to seek counselling. And I think that by way of counsellors and stuff, I think that kind of having this conversation that we're having tonight is kind of helpful enough for some men. I hear a lot of, you know, it's okay to open up stuff, and I don't think that alpha men are going to open up in that way, but instead of opening up, I kind of think that the message should be more to alpha men. It's have a little humility and ask for help. And that doesn't necessarily have to be from a friend. That can be from a professional, and that can be a confidential thing. You don't necessarily need, you know, your status in the tribe is still secure, you know, if you ask for it confidentially, and understanding that that may be kind of what's motivating them. This is what How to Win Friends and Influence People. I've been reading the book How to Win Friends and Influence People, and it's all about understanding people's motivations and kind of how can you get these people to do what you want them to do. It's by kind of speaking their language, is essentially, and I think that our zeitgeist needs to start speaking the language of alpha masculinity a little bit more, and understanding alpha masculinity, and understanding that alpha masculine men are a bit more prideful, a bit more, almost a little bit more insecure than kind of more sensitive men who are kind of comfortable with their kind of, there is an insecurity that goes around that kind of alpha masculine model. And so yes, there is guilt, there is kind of pride, there is a little bit of stubbornness maybe in asking for counsellor or asking for financial assistance, or even like if you've gotten in over your head with whatever other criminal activity, sort of admitting to yourself that, hey, I'm in over my head here, I need to get out, is something that a lot of alpha men struggle with. And yes, so that is sort of, I think, should be the gate of the conversation. I think that should be the message of the zeitgeist, is that there's, your alpha masculinity is good and beneficial and good to the tribe, but at the same time have the humility and admit to yourself that there's a problem and seek it out in yourself, but do not wait. Yeah, and whenever you understand that that's kind of how they're thinking, then you understand how to convince them to seek the help that they need to seek out. Is my perspective on that.